Hello and welcome. My name is Belinda Castles and I'm a lecturer in creative writing in the English department at the University of Sydney and coordinator of the creative writing program. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm working today on the unceded lands of the Gadigal people of northeastern Sydney and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. As part of the Writers at Work series, we're very lucky to welcome Phillipa McGuinness. Phillipa is the author of Skin Deep, The Year Everything Changed, 2001, and editor of Copyfight. Her work has appeared in The Guardian, the Sydney Morning Herald, Griffith Review, Inside Story and Meanjin. I suspect more than that as well. She is a former publisher at NewSouth, UNSW Press and Cambridge University Press, and a regular commentator on book publishing, maternal health, and life and politics at the turn of the 21st century. Welcome, Pip. It's great to have you with us.
So much for inviting me, Belinda.
It's a pleasure. I have lots to ask you. So I'll just say now to the audience, please do feel free to put questions in the chat at any time. If I appear to be ignoring them, I'm probably going to save them for a sort of little chunk of them for later. But it's quite helpful to have them there because I can see that I need to take a break and include your questions. So please do feel free to do that. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Pip, can you tell us how you came to work in the world of books and writing?
Oh, wow. That is really going back in time. It was a fluke, really. I had finished my honours year in Spanish and Latin American Studies at the University of New South Wales, and had it in my head that I wanted to be a journalist. So I guess I kind of knew that I wanted to write, and I applied to be a graduate cadet on the Age. And I got to the end, or towards the end, but I didn't get the job, which is probably lucky because I think I would have been a terrible journalist because I'm not dispassionate about anything. And so I was walking along the halls of UNSW and happened to see an ad on the notice board. So this would have been in 1989, so before the internet. I saw a pinned up notice advertising for an editorial assistant at Cambridge University Press, and the applications were closing that day. And there was no email, so I rang and said, I want to apply. Can I put it in the post so that the application reaches you next week? And whoever I spoke to said, yes, that's fine. And I got the job. And really what that meant was that I discovered I loved the publishing industry, but on one hand, it derailed me from being a writer then because I published other people's stuff basically for the next 25 years and never really thought of myself as a writer at all. But I'm glad it derailed me because I read a lot and I learned a lot, and I learned how publishing works. And sometimes now that I'm on the other side, I feel like I know too much. I wish I knew less about the mechanics of it all, particularly the commercial side sometimes. But yeah, that's how I got into it. And I ended up working for CUP for about a decade, actually. But I was based in Sydney and Melbourne, but travelled a lot and spent an extended period of time in the UK, in Cambridge. And at that time, I don't know if they still do, the press owned a couple of apartments in New York. Can you imagine? There would have been more money in New York real estate than publishing, let me tell you. But I spent quite a bit of time there too. So it was excellent experience.
Wow, that's amazing. I've been hearing a lot of tales of serendipity about people's careers lately. You know, we plan so carefully and then we hear stories like that. I was wondering if, and you talking about being derailed for 20, 25 years kind of adds to this mystery for me. Did you find the shift into writing nerve-wracking after working as a publisher for so many years?
Yes, I did. And I guess for me, it was kind of baby steps, really, you know. So someone would ask me to write an article about something. And I thought, oh, yeah, I can do that. And then I had the idea to edit a book about copyright, which sounds like the most arcane subject of all time. But I thought the concept of copyright is so fundamental, really, to creative work and getting paid for creative work. And because of the digital age, we seem to be in the thick of this incredible shift where people think that all content should be free. So I wanted to explore that from the perception of artists. And I remember thinking, who could I ask to edit that book? You know, who would be somebody who's interested in these ideas and has good contacts, you know, across screenwriting and music and art and podcasting and, you know, all the different forms that I wanted to write about, including, of course, literature. And something went off in my head and I thought, I could do this. I'd be pretty good at this. That would be fun. And I think I'd never really thought about it, mainly because I was just so freaking busy all the time, you know, trying to get 20 or 25 books out every year as part of a program. Like there was just, and managing people, you know, being quite senior, there was just no space in my head for thinking about it. Having children as well, you know, I never thought, well, I'm going to finish my 50 or 60 hour a week job, you know, do the family stuff, and then I'll write a book. But that book, Copyfight, I joke, but it's kind of true, was the gateway drug that led me into wanting to write myself.
Fantastic. So let's talk about your books. There's some, you wear many hats, writer, publisher, editor. So let's think about the books for a while. So the year everything changed, 2001. So that had a personal narrative, but it also had a sort of larger narrative about the world shifting. And I was interested in what kind of shift you were seeing there and how that sort of shaped itself into the idea for a book for you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, you know, I write in that book, and I've talked quite a lot about where the idea came to me to write that book. And I suppose it's an example of why I'm really not serious when I use the word derailed, you know, that I didn't write all that time, because what I did over those years at Cambridge and at NewSouth was publish a lot of history. And I think that, and I'd studied history and literature at university, but I think that publishing and reading so much history for so many years shifted the way I think about the world. So I probably think quite historically, you know, like what are the forces that made this event happen that got us to where we are now. So one day, I think it was in 2016, I was at the ANU at a conference, and I didn't really get to go to that many academic conferences because I never had any time. But I was sitting there listening to a celebration of the work of Alan Atkinson, who is a historian. And a number of people were talking about these slice histories. So a history of a particular year that were published in Australia around the time of the bicentennial. So around 1988, which will be before many of the students here or those listening were born. And I thought that's a really interesting approach. It's like a narrative device to tell a story of a particular year. And the publisher in me was thinking, what would be a good year? What's a momentous year that, you know, we could talk about or think about or write about? Now, again, I could commission someone to do that. And 2001 popped into my head, particularly on a global level because of 9/11. And then I'm sitting there thinking, Tampa, of course, was that year. And it was the year that I lost my second child. And so I started thinking, which happened in a way as a, you know, in my small world, but it was the most terrible thing that had ever happened to me against this backdrop of these huge world events. And I thought, you know, we can all be caught up in these deeply personal, traumatic events. But if you're a writer, you can think, wow, that's a story. How could I tell that story? How could I shape it into a kind of narrative? So they are actually the thought processes that were going through my head while I was sitting in this conference room at ANU. And I thought, I'm going to do this myself. But it was terrifying. It was absolutely a terrifying thought to me. One, that I could write a book, that I would do it. And two, that I would write about such personal things. So, you know, writing about 9/11 is distressing, of course. I mean, there is just so much death and trauma and destruction that had ripple effects that I think we're still living through, to be honest. But it's kind of abstract because I watched it on television, but I wasn't there. You know, I didn't live through that, you know, on the ground, as it were. So writing something personal was challenging, but I felt really compelled to do it. And somehow I wrote that book while I was working. I did take some time off and went part-time, but basically I had this huge job. And my daughter, who graduated from the University of Melbourne yesterday, was doing her HSC. So that year, so I look back now and I think, how did we all survive that? How did I get that book out? But somehow it happened. And one other thing that people might be interested in, you know, a lot of people said, oh, you were at NewSouth, why didn't you get NewSouth to publish it? And I thought, no, this is really separate from my work in this publishing house. It has to be another publisher. But I got an agent because I've been doing this for so long, it just would have been excruciating for me to pitch it to publishers and negotiate contracts and do all that myself.
Yeah, there's the business side that you sort of need distance for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm wondering, I don't know if this question is answerable, but maybe you have feelings about it.
I'll give it a go, Belinda.
I know you will, Pip.
Oh, she just froze. We'll never know what the question was. Oh, no. What do we do now? Just wait?
She'll be back.
Oh, here she is. She's back.
Okay. I was just about to send you a note in the chat because I could still hear you.
All right. Okay.
I will come back. If I go, I will come back.
Right.
That's my promise to you. Okay. So I was wondering if you had a sense of, because you have so much experience as a publisher of nonfiction, when you get hold of an idea, like your 2001 book and more recently your Skin Deep book, do you know that it's going to find purchase? Do you think, yes, that's got it, whatever it is? Whatever. Okay, it's maybe another way to ask that is, if it came across your desk, you think, yes, Yes, that's got promise.
Yeah, it's a tough question. Because we all know that when you're really close to something, you can lose perspective, and start assuming everybody will be as interested in a particular topic or idea or concept, whatever it may be. But I think with both books, I thought I would think to myself, is this a book I would read? Is this a book I would publish? And the answer was yes. But I think, like all writers, you veer between being really confident and thinking this is brilliant, the world can't live without this, it's going to change everything, to thinking, oh my God, how did I ever think this was going to work? And, it's a terrible idea. So I have all that self-doubt, I suppose, that comes as part of the package. But I also have self-belief. And so I hope sometimes that the self-belief, will overcome the self-doubt. But I spend a lot of time working on proposals. So in that sense, I think probably as a nonfiction writer, the proposals that I have written are probably longer and more detailed and more deeply researched than a lot of other nonfiction proposals that some trade publishers might get. So there's that. But with both books, I did a lot of research. But I'm not an academic. I don't see myself as an academic writer at all, because my books are quite general. I'm covering a lot of ground. It's not like I get a particular box of archives, which I'm using here as a kind of metaphor, and think, right, I am going to spend the next 5 years, digging through this box. I'm going to look at it from every angle. I'm going to read every bit of literature other people have published about what is in this box. That's not my approach. I'll think, oh, I like the top layer of this box, but that's another shiny box over there that's relevant to the story that I'm trying to tell. I'm going to look at that as well. So it's a more organic process in a way, where I'm doing research that I think will serve the topic and the story in the way I want to tell it. And we'll have, a certain amount of authority, but it's not going to be a highly technical, super specialist book aimed at other specialist readers. I want anyone to be able to read the books that I publish, even if they're not especially interested in any of the themes of the book. If they're not interested in the technology that I write about in 2001, or stillbirth, or skin cancer, or beauty that I write about in the latest book, I want them to just come to it with the curiosity that I have come to, the books I write, and kind of get, I was going to use the word caught up, but seduced might be, a better word. Like, I want readers to feel that, yeah, this is a journey they want to come on with me.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, when I was thinking about what I wanted to ask you, whether, so your books have this kind of, I mean, we'll get into Skin Deep in a second, but they have this kind of, it's not it's not surface level at all. It's meaty, but I understand what you say about it not being a sort of an academic kind of that kind of niche research. And I was thinking, I wonder if this kind of writing comes out of being a nonfiction publisher for so long, having a lot of knowledge about a lot of things and wanting to explore all angles of something.
Yeah, you've nailed it. I really think it has. You know, if I hadn't done the work in publishing that I'd done for so many years and bored everyone around me, you know, when something comes up and I go, oh, I published a book about that. Do you know, blah, 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 blah. I think I'm a really curious person. I read a lot of nonfiction. I also read a lot of fiction. But I read a lot of shorter form writing as well, you know, short articles and essays. I've got quite a good memory. And I mean, it's probably not as good as it used to be, but quite often as I was writing, I would think, oh, that's an interesting point. I remember reading that in something, you know, however long ago, and just making those kinds of connections. And frankly, I don't know how anybody wrote nonfiction before the internet. You know, like the idea that you would think there was a New Yorker article about that, and I can just go, I think it was this writer or it was this topic, and search the New Yorker archive. And there it is. Whereas in the past, you would have had to have gone to the library and thought, I think it was 2015, but maybe it was 2014, you know, or I guess I should use an earlier pre-digital date. And you would spend 2 hours like flick, you know, searching. And now you can be reading the article within minutes before you even know that's what you want to read. I think it's extraordinary. And it means that, you know, both books without the internet, well, they would have been completely different, but they would have taken me much longer to write, because just, you know, for example, looking at New York Times front pages on the 10th of September 2001 would have been quite an onerous thing to do. It would have been possible, but it would take a long time. Whereas you can just call it up and it's there within seconds. So it's great, but sometimes that can be overwhelming because there is so much. How do you, you know, navigate through that so you tell the story you want to tell without overwhelming readers with detail?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the question of research, isn't it? That happens in fiction too.
Yeah.
That it's the story that matters. It's the narrative. It's the thread. And you can lose sight of that because there's much more information than you can usefully pass on.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And quite often at those points, I go for long walks.
Yeah.
And I say to myself, what are you trying to say here? What's the story? How would you sum this up in 25 words? Which is something that I used to do to authors when I was publishing, you know, when particularly academic authors would say, well, my book is about, have you read an article by so-and-so person? It's kind of inspired by that. And what I'm also doing is drawing from this. And I would say, just cut to the chase. Tell me in 25 words what your book does. And it's really difficult to do. It's difficult for everyone to do, but it does give you a kind of discipline and I don't think that it necessarily means you're trying to simplify things or oversimplify things. It just helps to bring clarity to your thinking.
I think it helps you to write as well if
Yeah.
you do that. There's that 3-minute thesis competition
Yes.
that PhD students do, and it's not just for them to communicate what they're doing, it's for them to tell themselves what they're doing in the process of getting it down, which helps with the writing.
Yeah, for sure. It really does.
Okay, so let's get to Skin Deep, which seems on the surface, excuse the pun, to be quite a different kind of book to The Year Everything Changed. Can you tell us how you came to write that? Tell us a little bit about the ideas behind this book.
Yeah, well, you know how I told the story about sitting in the conference hall at ANU? There is a similar kind of story I can tell about this that involves sitting in a dermatology waiting room. And it's and I will tell that story in a sec, but I'm going to preface it by saying it kind of oversimplifies, I think, how these ideas work, because it makes it seem like it's this huge eureka moment after which everything follows. But there has to be fertile ground in the first place. I think that your mind kind of has to be ready. You have to have been thinking along certain lines already. So that's the preamble. Here's the story, and there's going to be a kind of part 2 to this story as well. So I'm sitting in the waiting room of the dermatologist that I go to in Bondi Junction. It's a really big practice. It's always packed. It's really hard to get an appointment. And you can see from looking at me that I'm white. My background is Celtic, so I have really quite fair skin. And I grew up next to the beach in the 1970s and 80s, which was before the slip, slop, slap message landed. So I am there to have a full body skin check because I am prone to skin cancer, not melanomas, touch wood, non-melanoma skin cancer that demands attention. It's best if you get them early. I've had 5 and one while I was writing the book, a new kind that I found myself and diagnosed. So anyway, I'm sitting in this busy waiting room. The doctor I see is running late. His background is Chinese, which is kind of relevant. And I'm looking around at, many of my fellow fair-skinned Australians, and I could see, and this is the nature of skin, it's so obvious, it's public, it's who we are, everyone can see it. I'm looking around and I thought, all these people, or most of them, are here for the same reason I'm here, skin cancer. So I can see all these people who've had something biopsied, or they're there to get stitches removed. And I thought, this is really messed up, because in most parts of the world, skin cancer is not so prevalent. Why is it so prevalent here? All this is going through my head because white Australians, our skin did not evolve to be here. And I start thinking about the forces of colonization and migration. And then, of course, people in that room aren't there just for skin cancer. There was one young teenage boy with terrible acne. Again, just so obvious. I can look at him and think, I know why you're here. But most of the time, if you're sitting in the GP, unless somebody's clutching their stomach and moaning, you don't know why they're there. But there's something about skin that is so public. It says something about who we are. People in that waiting room would have been there for their eczema or psoriasis or countless other skin conditions. And there were groups, or, a stream, I should say, of women who were going in to see the nurse. And the nurse there does cosmetic procedures. So Botox and fillers and laser under the supervision of the dermatologists. And I just thought, wow, the way that we read skin can tell us a lot about what it means to be human, how we feel and how we got here, in every sense. So I started thinking skin would be a really interesting subject for a book. So that's, I think probably by the time I left, I thought, I think I'm going to start looking into that and developing a proposal that could be my next book. But there's another part. This is the part 2 of the story. And I've told that first part of the story, in a kind of pithier way, quite a bit on radio interviews that I've done since the book came out, when people say, so Phillipa, where did the idea for the book come from? And I never shared this second part of the story. And that is that many years ago in the New Yorker, I mentioned the New Yorker before, I'd read an article by a doctor who writes for amazing case studies for a general audience called Atul Gawanda. And he wrote an essay, some of you may have read it, it's quite famous now actually, called The Itch. And it's like a horror story. It's about a woman who basically cannot stop itching. And what happens is just horrific and kind of unthinkable. And I don't want to be looking at a Zoom and seeing people faint. So I won't go into detail, but what it triggered in my own mind is the kind of the way in which we're so suggestible, that we hear about itching. When I was writing all this, I felt like I was, scratching myself, but not so much that I ended up in a psychiatric institution as this woman did. But I thought the links between the mind and the body, which sounds like a classic philosophical thing, but the way in which our skin experiences sensation, or we look at it, or we look at ourselves in the mirror, and it affects our minds, it affects the way we feel, the way that we carry ourselves, our confidence, our sense of self in the world. That to me also seems another really interesting aspect of skin. So I joke towards the end of Skin Deep, it's not really a joke though, that at one point, because of this kind of psychic connection between skin and the mind, I thought, I'll call this book Skin Sanity, because it is a thread that I'm interested in. But the book has ended up being really, really broad. But I think if I hadn't read that essay, The Itch, and never forgotten it, Skin Deep would have turned out a little differently.
Right. Okay. That's really interesting angle. I was thinking about the opening as so in the beginning of the book. I'll just show people the book because it is beautiful. Oh, you probably can't.
Oh, I can hold it up. My
background is interfering. Yes. And so you begin it with an account of watching a beauty video on YouTube by the AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Can you tell us why you opened your book with this? That was an interesting method. It brought various things together. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so before I watched that video, I had never watched a makeup tutorial. I knew they existed because of my daughter. And I guess probably in the abstract, I knew that, there were all these, Instagram stars, who did makeup tutorials, or YouTube stars. But I saw a link. I'm an admirer of AOC. I think what she's done politically in the US is really interesting. And I've, really had the sense that there is a kind of generational difference. And when she did this video and combined makeup tips, which I actually found very useful, and politics, I thought, this is so zeitgeisty. I can hardly believe that I'm watching it. She's super articulate, and also really beautiful and very good at applying makeup. And I just found it so intriguing. And in the 18 minutes of the video, I realized that she covered many of the themes that I was writing about in my book. So she describes her skin as being melanated. So she is talking about being a woman of color and talking about race. She's telling everyone they need to apply SPF because the sun can be so damaging to skin. She's talking about beauty as currency, touches on issues of gender and feminism quite explicitly. And I thought, she's really running through the themes of my book, and I can use this as a preface because I didn't really want to start by saying, you know, the human epidermis has many layers, or, you know, something really predictable. I thought I want to do something that will grab people's attention, where they think, oh, I didn't expect this. And I just think it is a really neat introduction to the book.
Yeah, and it was also sort of making me think in another way about your earlier book, and there's a different kind of tone to it, but the ways in which the personal and the political are brought together in your method in your books, and then also in that video, it's like a distillation of the ways that if you can find something emblematic to tell the story, it opens it up it brings people into the story, and it opens up the themes for you in a kind of a sort of condensed way that's really useful. Another thing I came across in your book, which I thought, well, you must have been very pleased when you remembered this quote, was from John Berger in Ways of Seeing. The relationship between what we see and what we know is never settled. And again, that just seemed like such a beautiful encapsulation of what you were doing with this book. Could you talk about that tension in relation to this book?
Yes. It really, I'm so glad you've mentioned that. You are the first person to mention John Berger. And I just feel like Ways of Seeing has been so central to how I think about so many things in the world, including beauty. And I suppose one of the themes of the book is the kind of doubleness of skin being inside and outside. And the fact that so often, and AOC does this in her video, which was another reason I wanted to put it in. She basically says, but it's what is on the inside that counts, not how you look on the outside. And as I watched her, I thought, great, that makes everyone feel good. But look at you, you're beautiful. And one reason why you're in this position is because you are so presentable. So I think there's this really deep hypocrisy on some ways, that often when we say, oh, you know, skin color doesn't matter because it's what's on the inside that counts. And I think, well, how does that explain structural racism? You know, it's just too easy to say that. So that sense of what we see never being settled, even with ourselves, when we look in the mirror, you know, I look at myself and I see, I'm trying not to look at myself now, actually, in this Zoom thing. But, you know, I see a 55-year-old woman who very much looks her age, I would say. I'm feeling quite tired today, you know, so I probably look a bit drawn. I've got sun-damaged skin, you know, the whole kit and caboodle. but I don't feel like that. I feel younger, but this casing around me means that the world sees me in a certain way, even if I don't see myself like that. And I think we all go through that to some degree. And I just thought that John Berger quote encapsulated a lot of that so beautifully. I think it's very profound, and I love that idea of things never being settled, because they are not.
Yeah, absolutely. And skin's such it's so great in itself as a literal thing to talk about, but also as a metaphor. But before I push into that, RFS got a question, and I'm just going to read it out for the recording, even though those here can see it. So, hi Phillipa, a question occurred to me as you were discussing your first book, The Year Everything Changed. While you were in the process of drafting it, how did you balance your personal feelings and emotional challenges that occurred throughout the process and the professional labour of writing, which is a big challenge regardless of the topic? Thanks, RFS. Excellent question.
Yeah, it is a really good question. Writing that personal stuff was huge for me. And for my family and friends, really, because it wasn't a big secret what happened to Daniel, but I had never really talked about it in great detail. I found it very difficult to do that. And after the book came out, a lot of people would say to me, oh, it must have been so cathartic. And I don't think people really know. I knew what they were getting at, but I thought, well, I still feel all that grief and pain, but something has shifted so I can talk about it. And the process of doing that, I think, made me, I'm quite an empathetic person, and I hope I write with empathy as well. But I was very open to the stories I was reading about, everything from people being bombed in Afghanistan after 9/11, refugees, Tampa. There was a lot of misery in that year. And I think that personal process gave a kind of, a heft to my understanding of other events. I couldn't write about them. I couldn't write like cliches, like when the towers came down, and not really think about what that meant for the people who were in there and their families. So it was quite an emotional thing writing it. But with all writing, in my experience, it just involves sitting down for an insanely long time and nutting through, just whether it's something, if I was reading political transcripts or my own medical transcripts, you've still got to bring a kind of sense of analysis to what you're doing. And sometimes you do have to step back a bit, but this is why I said I wouldn't be a good journalist. I never want to feel dispassionate at all about what I'm reading, no matter where it's coming from, because it affects people's lives, and I don't want that to be lost in my writing. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah.
No, thanks, Pip. Really fascinating response. I was wondering if this is not too abstract a question, and I can become a little bit more concrete if it is. But I was wondering about writing is a way of knowing the world. So you have gone through a long career engaging with the world through books in one way or another. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit about what that's meant for you.
Yeah, I think reading has always been how I've understood the world. I am quite a social person. It's not as if, I'm only, interacting with the world through the written word. I have conversations with people, and I like talking to strangers. Not random strangers on the street, but meeting people for the first time. So I guess in one sense, I'm really a bit of an extrovert, although I can spend long periods alone. However, quite often, if I speak to someone, or I read something, or I hear something, or I see a film, and I think I would like to know more about that, the way I have always done it is through books. So if I see a film based on a novel, most of the time I want to read the novel. Or if I see a film based on a moment in history, usually unless it's military history, I will want to go and read about that. And so I just think that books are really the most extraordinary way to engage deeply with a subject, or to live another kind of experience. And there are many other ways you can do that, of course. Like podcasts now are a brilliant way to do that. But I think nothing can match books for the kind of immersion, whether they're fiction or non-fiction, that kind of deep engagement over time. But heaven knows that books are competing with so many other things for people's time. So many colleagues, or, friends, or just random people I've come across will say, oh, I'm really interested in skin. What a great topic. But I'm not sure I've really got time to read, a 300-page book about it. And I get that, but part of me sometimes, and this is probably, I don't know, rude or self-centered, I feel like saying, just step away from the Netflix, just, you can make time, it's a choice. And we all make that choice. And I guess, my choice generally is to read.
Yes, one we share. Okay, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. One from Kate. So when you're writing your books, how can you tell when you've reached the end of the story you're telling, when the issues at the centre of the writing may continue to change or evolve, like the impacts of the year 2001 or the many facets of skin you've referenced? Yes, and I might just add to Kate's question, if that's all right, just as a part of that. How sort of epoch contingent the book itself is, when you're writing a book like Skin. Okay, I'll back out of that question now. Thank you.
One thing that being a publisher really taught me, and this is an excellent question, is you have to draw the line somewhere. And you need to be pragmatic and write the best possible book you can with the resources you have in the time you have available. I'm a very strong believer in deadlines. And I think that if a publisher says, we want your book by the end of July, it's usually not going to be an arbitrary date. They will think, okay, we've programmed it for a certain month next year. That gives us enough time to do a structural edit, and we'll be able to present it at our sales conference and, pitch it to the Brisbane Writers Festival. There will be a plan. It's not an arbitrary date. And I've always felt that if I miss a deadline by a significant amount, I'm letting a whole lot of people down. There are exceptions to this. So say, for example, and this is completely hypothetical, with Skin, a week before I was going to deliver, someone announced that there was a vaccine for skin cancer. Nobody with this vaccine, you weren't going to get, melanoma or, basal cell, going to be absolutely transformative for Australia. I think I would say to the publisher, look, I finished the book, but there's been this huge development, and I will either have to add to the chapter about skin cancer while it's in editing, or can you give me another month so I can find out a bit more about what this means and what's going on. But I think very often for books that aren't about current events, where all of a sudden there's a new political leader and, everything has changed and the book is redundant. Most of the time for books that have a bit of historical sweep or that are essayistic in the way that mine are, you just have to draw the line, because otherwise you'll just keep doing it forever. And for some people, that's fine. They're happy to spend a decade working on their, magnum opus. But for me, I want the book to be out in the world finding readers. So got to keep moving it along.
Yeah, thanks, Pip. We've got a couple more questions which might take us over the hour. Are you okay to go a couple of minutes over? So Beth asks, she says, you mentioned that there were things about publishing that as an author now you wish you didn't know so much about. I was also intrigued by that, Beth. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yes. A lot of it has to do with the commercial side of it in particular. Like, I've got a sense of how many copies I would need to sell for it to be worthwhile for the publisher. And with this book in particular, I've really tried not to think about that. Like, just think I've written the best book that I can. I'm going to be promoting it as much as I can. I'm not going to stress about sales. With my 2001 book, because I was still working for a publisher, I could log into BookScan and see what it was selling. And that was extremely bad for my mental health. Like, I would never do that again. But I guess I know the mechanics of so many things, like how long booksellers have to return books if they haven't sold. Someone said to me, oh, is your book available in Big W? And it's no surprise to me that it's not. I don't think it is the kind of, Big W or Kmart kind of book, but I know what that means for sales. I know what it means for sales when something like an election is called and interest rates go up. In general, over my long experience, people are not walking into shopping centres or into bookshops because they feel a kind of anxiety about buying something that is non-essential. I mean, of course, I think it's essential, but there are a lot of books out there. I know that the relationship that women readers and buyers have to a lot of non-fiction is complicated. Women buy most books, but in general, of course, it's a generalization. They tend to buy fiction. And my book is, because of the colour, and also it's written by a woman. I write about beauty. I know a lot of men think, oh, that's not going to be my kind of book. But I'm thinking, dudes, it is. You're getting, melanomas at a really high rate. I want you to read this book. We all grapple with our appearance, whoever we are, whatever our skin colour, whatever our gender. So I think it's relevant, but yes.
Yeah.
It's it's complicated.
And you know a lot. So a final question, and then I want to mention something that we didn't get to before we go. So Ashita asks, as a publisher and writer, could you speak to what makes a story promising?
It's a good question. In one way, I can answer and say, when I was a publisher, if someone sent me a proposal and I wanted to keep reading, I thought, oh, I wish there was another chapter, or I would like to keep reading. This is a great idea. I like where this is headed. I want to read more. That was always a really good sign. I'm sure that in all your classes, people talk a lot about voice, and really quite often I think, oh, I like this writer's voice. I will go with them, even if they're writing about something that I didn't know I was interested in. So that is, something that really shows promise. And I share this bit of advice all the time with everyone when people say, what makes a good proposal? Like if you're pitching something to a publisher, I always say, write it in the voice that you want to write the book in. And a lot of people don't do that. It really surprises me. They say, this will be a light-hearted book, and it's the most, the driest, densest bit of text you've ever come across. So, yeah, I think that's how I would answer that.
Thanks, Pip. That's great advice. I just wanted to mention, because I can't believe we didn't get to it, but I knew we would have too much to talk about. Your work now on Open Book. Can you tell us, I'm going to put a link in the chat so people can have a look at it later. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? And then we'll have to say goodbye.
Yeah. Well, Open Book was a magazine I didn't know existed, to be really honest, until I was approached about editing it. It's published by the State Library of New South Wales, and you'll know that a lot of cultural institutions have magazines that they do basically for people who are already on the inside. So, friends of the institution or supporters. And this particular magazine, which is a glossy quarterly, does all that, but it's supposed to reach out to the wider world, kind of bouncing off the library or libraries and writing and the vast collection of the library. And so for the first time, I found myself commissioning short stories, poetry, photography, profiles of writers or editors or artists. I've, over the past months, been involved in photo shoots of food, which was something I never thought I would be doing, but the magazine includes recipes, and I'm really proud of it. It's been a big shift for me doing something that is so visual all the time. There's a lot of contemporary photography in there, and I'm very interested in contemporary photography, so that's been really fun. But yeah, it's actually got a decent subscriber base. It goes out to public libraries. And I just want it to be something really beautiful that people can pick up and enjoy, but read something that has a bit of substance. I've been trying to commission more essays, not that the magazine hasn't had ballast, but to just give it a bit more. So yeah, that's been really fun.
It's fantastic to hear about a place to publish work as well. That's great. So I have access to a year's subscription of this and Pip's book. So I'm just putting my email in the chat. So first person to email me can have those as a little prize on a Friday.
Hurry.
And I want to thank you very warmly, Pip, for spending an hour with us. And the life of this talk will go on in our program for our writing and publishing students. I could have asked you questions for at least another hour or two another time, but thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it, Belinda, and it's nice to meet you all on screen, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a restful weekend, I hope.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Pip.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take
Bye.
care, everyone.